Keri, what's it like to meet President Trump?
It was an incredible opportunity to be invited to the White House at the end of March to see the executive signing ceremony to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. While I was there, I was able to meet with 9 different governors, speak to them. Lots of allies were also invited from around the country doing this work to advance education freedom in our country, get the bureaucracy out of the way. Now, I didn't get to speak directly with the president that day. He'd been on an international call. He slipped in for an hour for the presentation, signing ceremony. But really appreciate just the opportunity that he would invite me and recognize my work. It was a really special day.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, so what exactly did you do that led to this invitation?
Well, I've been working with many others around the country to advocate that parents would be empowered to have a portion of their child's education funding to allocate to the school of their choice. So we call that education freedom, school choice, but also advocating for the things that are hindering effective education in our country. And one of those things that has been an absolute disaster for the last 45 years is this US Department of Education. It was created.
Yes, that's so true.
Yes, it was created by President Jimmy Carter um, as a payback to the teacher unions who helped get him elected. And it has not improved student learning, but it has spent $3 trillion over the 45 years. Many presidents have talked about downsizing it or getting rid of it, but nobody has followed through until President Trump. And so I was there for that signing ceremony. They are dismantling this thing. And while it will take the votes in Congress to fully eliminate the department, they can dismantle this line by line down to the ground, return education to the states, and get it closer to moms and dads having a say in their child's education.
What are the successes so far in that dismantling process?
Oh, so many positives have already happened. The Trump administration came in extremely well prepared. They had a game plan of what they wanted to do across policy areas. And they brought in an elite team of leaders, not just at the cabinet positions, but in those tier 2, tier 3 leadership positions as well. The best and the brightest have been brought in, and education is no different. And so what's happened was immediately cutting millions of dollars that were being spent on DEI, as one example, critical
Great.
race theory. They eliminated hundreds of pages on the department's website that had to do with DEI resources for schools.
Wait,
So
but how are we going to stop systemic racism if we get rid of DEI?
things that have nothing to do with reading, writing, math, reasoning, what our children need in this country. And so getting these distractions, getting these attacks on the basic identity of children, whether it's radical gender ideology, critical race theory, or funneling this anti American worldview to them through American public education. Those things are being cut. They've also cut over half of the bureaucrats that have worked in the department. So they downsized from
Wow.
over 4,000 to a staff around 2,000.
Wow, they've already done that. That's impressive.
Yes, just hit the ground running, and they are making such great strides, but they are far from finished in making education effective in our country. And again, moving out those things that have no place in schools and no place in classrooms.
When you're talking about having good people in positions, not just as the Secretary of Education, but other positions, is that the Project 2025 Heritage Foundation you're referring to, or where did this coming in with the good policy come from?
Yes, I can't speak specifically to that. I was not involved with any of that. My work is at Discovery Institute as well as Independent Women's Forum. But with Trump being in office prior, he understood how things work. And then he had 4 years when he was not in office to prepare a team and to get people around him who could help recruit those who were going to be the most strategic and would be the most effective in these positions. And so this team was built many days and months in advance, and even years in some cases, to be so prepared to hit the ground running. And we've seen that across all policy areas.
Yeah, I think him getting shot really helped because now he's even more motivated.
Yes, there's kind of a joke of people that work in policy now is like, you just can't keep up with the man. Like, we know that he doesn't sleep much, but what he's accomplishing on all fronts is truly incredible. And the American people are grateful. This is what they voted for. They voted to get our country back to a place where freedom is protected, preserved, as well as to have common sense. And we see that across policy areas. Education is no different.
Yeah, it's nice to know that not every election can be stolen.
All right. I'm not going to get into the weeds of that. I feel like I saw on the news last night. It was quite a heated debate. So I will leave that there. But in Oklahoma, they now are having kids look back at that critically and not just be told, you know, um, that there was no election interference or anything, but the state, through the direct leadership of their state superintendent, is saying, hey, we want kids to think critically. We want to present all of the information, all of the facts. And so hats off to Oklahoma for doing that, and having the courage to say, like, this narrative of the media, and what's been reported is not necessarily true. And we want students to look in at evidence, make decisions, be critical thinkers, things that are going to prepare them for life. And that's just the latest example of how they're using something timely that has been in the news in these children's lifetime, as an opportunity for kids to learn. So,
Love it.
yeah.
I'm just curious on a personal level. What's it like walking into the Oval Office, seeing those governors, seeing the president, just being there?
Yeah. So this event was held in the East Room instead of the Oval Office due to the amount of press on hand as well as attendees. The room was absolutely packed. The East Room in the White House is the largest room. They convert it, you know, sometimes it looks like a ballroom, other times it's for executive order signing ceremonies. They transform that room. They use the front of the room, sometimes the side of the room. It's really incredible what the events team at the White House does. But it was absolutely amazing just to walk in and have the opportunity, for about 45 minutes to an hour before the event started, to just speak individually with these 9 governors who are there, who have led in our country on education reform. Just those meaningful conversations. Some of the governors I'd met before, some I hadn't. Truly unforgettable, and just such a day of celebration as we kicked off the beginning of dismantling the U.S. Department of Education with the goal of making education in our country truly back to the basics of core academics, as well as returning to high expectations, getting out this notion of equity just dominating. Really, what this notion of equity in public schools is doing is it's dumbing down education, and we cannot afford that for the future of our children, for their opportunities. We've got to keep high standards, and so getting rid of this department is going to save money, cut bureaucracy, get it back to the states. It's going to provide true accountability and hopefully move us towards a place where America returns to be competitive on a world stage, because we are not competitive with what our students are learning, right now internationally.
How would you say Linda McMahon is doing?
She's doing absolutely terrific. I was listening to an interview that she gave recently, and she said when the president asked her, to serve in this role, her first response back, these weren't her words, was, I'm not an educator. Although she had gone to school to get her teacher's certificate, and she's been on a board of a university for 16 years, and she'd been on the state board of education. She said, despite all of that, like, I'm not an educator. And he said, I'm not looking for an educator. I'm looking for a true leader with a track record of running something efficiently and effective. And he needed an executive who was going to
Exactly.
get the job done, as well as a great communicator, somebody that's going to be transparent. And she's just hit it out of the park. Really proud of the work she's doing, as well as the team she's continuing to build.
Great. So, in order to get to that amazing event, you had to do a lot of work. You're the director of the American Center for Transforming Education. Can you tell us a little bit about what the work specifically you've done to get to this spotlight?
Yeah, well, let me jump back and give you a quick overview of what my professional journeys look like, because it's been different than most public policy experts. I did not study public policy at the university and then go straight into this fresh out of college, move to DC, which is a typical path. When I graduated from undergrad, I moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. I was from Seattle, and I was a teacher for 8 years in the classroom. I was also a high school coach. And then after those 8 years, I went back to school to get my master's in school leadership and then began as the head of a small school. And so my first administration job was actually head of school. So it was a big, big stair step, learned a lot. And after doing that, went on, got my doctorate, did some research with that as I was doing my dissertation, and got really excited about the idea. What if we deliver education more than this factory model, one size fits all, which isn't the best for all kids? Every individual is unique. And so I got excited about what if we deliver education through virtual, through hybrid models, through university model. And so started leading a school that was serving students. Several were elite athletes where they needed high quality learning, but they needed the flexibility to train with these unique gifts that they had. We also had students who were battling very serious illness in and out of the hospital. So online gave them that flexibility. Other kids, maybe with learning differences or with incredible learning strengths, could work faster, work slower. And so just, being one of the front running online academies in our country, we can do this thing different. And then also through a hybrid program of some classes they could take on campus. Maybe it was like a science where they wanted the on campus lab portion for that hands on learning. But their English class, they wanted to do that online. So allowing for flexibility, customization. So did that for several years. And then after that, had this 20 years experience as a practitioner, decided I want to move into public policy and help shape the nation's education through bringing in these ideas that I learned at a classroom level and as a coach, as an administrator, and then on the non-traditional delivery side. So had a lot to learn when I came into public policy later in my career doing that. But the last 4.5 years truly been incredible. Advancing universal school choice throughout our country is one of the primary things I work on. So when I began this work in the fall of 2020, less than 1% of kids in our nation had access to a school choice program. 0 states had universal school choice, meaning all the families had the opportunity for a school choice program. No one had anything close. Well, fast forward over the last 4 years, I've been doing this work. So excited to share with you an update that as of today, more than 50% of kids in our country are eligible for a school choice program where their parents are empowered, with this free market environment to select the learning avenue that's going to best serve their unique child. And we have, so 16 states have universal school choice, and then some states have partial school choice, and that totals over the 50%. But we're not stopping there. There's so much more work to be done to make sure that every child in America has the opportunity to be in the best learning environment for them that's going to prepare them for life. Education sets the trajectory of somebody's life. And we want to make sure that our kids have every opportunity possible to absolutely flourish. So a little bit of history, but that's what I've been working on.
Okay, so I had a guest on recently, Alex Newman of Liberty Sentinel. So he gave me a different perspective on this topic. Initially, I was really, really in favor of like the vouchers, and I mean, my parents sent me to private school at great expense, very difficult for them, and I thought like, hey, anything that can get kids out of the public schools into better schools is better. Alex shared this perspective that what could happen is this allows for greater government control of private schools because the schools then get dependent on the parents being able to send their kids there because of the vouchers, and then the government could influence the criteria of the schools that are receiving those vouchers. What is your, first of all, does that objection make sense? And second of all, how would you address that?
First, I would address it by saying that has been the strategy that the teacher unions, who have very much incentives to keep children locked in these public schools, have fed into particularly the homeschool community, and then in other states, the Christian community, private school community, to create this sense of fear that if parents are given any portion of that state funding and the freedom to exit this public system, that schools in turn all of a sudden are going to be highly regulated and homeschool autonomy and freedom is going to be stripped away. Well, I can tell you with my 20 years of working in private education that government overreach, that is always gonna be there. There's always that reality. Look at
Yeah,
COVID. Private schools chose
exactly.
to not take the COVID relief money because they didn't want those strings attached from the government. Now, where school choice is different is the money is not going to those schools. It's going to moms and dads. And we look at the states where homeschooling's under attack. In Illinois, as one example, that was a major headline last month of this very blue state that has almost no school choice is trying to regulate even homeschool to an outrageous extent. Well, that's not happening in the states where education freedom is flourishing. And so I would just debunk that fear notion. It comes from the teacher unions. They've done an incredible job of spreading this fear. The money goes to parents and the parents allocated. And that is no more going to speed up government overreach than the, possibility of government overreach that's always been there. So I would say, w- when somebody's a homeschool family and they've benefited from school choice or they're a private school family and they've been able to do that without that funding, the last thing they should do is have this mindset of school choice for me, but not for you, and try to block that out of fear, that their autonomy is going to be under attack. It's simply not true. But, what a lack of empathy and care where something has been able to transform their family, that they've been able to homeschool their child. They see it's a tremendous benefit or a private school, but they want to block that for others. That's exactly what the Democratic politicians who are so against school choice because those teacher unions help get them elected. That's their position while they send their children to these elite private schools. So we need to cut that nonsense and say it's moms and dads who need to be empowered with full flexibility to take a portion of that child's education funding and allocate it accordingly.
You've really thought about this, and I haven't, but which way makes me want to understand it a little bit better. So, if the government did want to overreach and use the voucher system as a way to manipulate education, how would they do that, given that the money's going to the parents and not to the school?
That's a great question for those who are spreading that fear. I would ask them that question and say, you're touting that this is going to, education freedom, school choice is going to result in this government overreach. Well, show us where that's happening in these states that are passing robust school choice. Show us where is that happening? It's actually happening in the states where school choice is being blocked, where those in political power have the opportunity not only to block school choice, but to overregulate the homeschool and private school environment. So
Yeah, I guess that argument actually makes sense because if it was such a great tool for the government to manipulate education, then it seems like the most liberal states would be the ones to pass it.
absolutely, because again, it's those teacher unions who get those progressive policymakers and governors elected. They take the teacher dues and then they funnel it to these political leaders. And then in turn, there's this kind of you give the money, you get a favor back. They protect that public school monopoly. So they help get them elected, and they know that that payback is going to be to block school choice to keep this captive audience because when they keep more students, they keep more teachers. More teachers pay a higher amount of dues, and that keeps the unions' coffers full of funds. And so it has nothing to do with the best interests of children or their learning, but it's all about adults and power and control. We've got to break that. And our country was founded on free market principles. We've got to bring that to education. What we're going to see not only is allowing parents to exit the system, but the byproducts of a free market are going to be increasing quality, driving down costs, spurring innovation, what they always do. And education is absolutely desperate for all three of those things to happen.
Do you know some of these teachers unions leaders and what motivates them? I'm just like, do they actually care about the children and their well-being and their education?
Such a great question. I mean, look no farther than Randy Weingartner. You know, she's pretty notorious. She's in the news a lot. She's the head of the second largest teacher union in our country, the American Federation for Teachers. There's data that shows that she worked during COVID to specifically influence the CDC reopening of schools, and she continued to block that. Completely not in the best interest of children. And now, you know, who's the biggest one against closing the Department of Education? Randy Weingartner. In her own words, she's, quote, spitting mad over everything that's happening to get education back to the states, to get education more accountable, to get rid of the bureaucracy. And so it's a jobs program. You know, her job is to have more members, to have more political power. Just as one other example, during COVID, the LA Unified School District, their teacher unions held kids out of returning to school for multiple school years. I mean, private schools returned in full in person across our country by the fall of 2020. They proved it was safe. But in LA, they said, we're not going to bring children back, these teacher unions, until our political demands were met. And those included defunding the police, a moratorium on charter schools, so not even giving parents choice within the public system, and Medicare for all. Nothing that had to do with the education of children, but that's how they leverage that power and that control. It's very, very dysfunctional, and it's harming
Wow.
education for kids.
That's such a perversion of justice. The people who should be looking out for the kids' well-being the most, at least when it comes to education, are actively destroying it.
Yes, there was no reason that schools needed to stay closed. It spanned 3 different school years, in many
Crazy.
states in our country because of that teacher union control. And so parents saw through those remote Zoom sessions what was being peddled to their children at the expense of quality academics, and many parents left. There was this mass exodus. Those who were able to homeschool, those who were able to afford private school, there was an explosion of micro schools popping up, which are just small schools. And we see that as a result, the general public as well as parents have grown in their huge support of school choice across our country. And with the voters, that support is across the aisle, the political aisle. Now, when it comes to those political leaders, their relationship of who gets them elected influences their decisions. And like I said, many times they're sending their own children to these elite private schools, but they will block it because they know who, you know, funds their campaigns.
Okay, so let me take this voucher idea a step further. Because so another criticism is that it's actually not. How do I say this? I think a popular way of saying it is it's not conservative enough. That it's like the parents are in a situation of begging the government for their own money back, right? So wouldn't the more natural thing be, hey, the parents they're not compelled to pay for public education to begin with, and they can just do whatever they want. It's not a voucher. It's just they just do whatever they want for the benefit of their kids.
Well, for many parents, you know, they don't have the feasibility to have a stay at home parent to make homeschool a reality, or a grandparent or somebody who can be there, whether it's a single parent, 2 working parent household. And others simply can't afford astronomical amount of tuition, you know, per year in our country. And so these families are already paying taxes for their child's education.
That's what I'm saying
Yeah,
is
so we've
that
got to.
why are they being forced to pay those taxes to begin with?
That's a question for Uncle Sam. So hopefully Doge is going to look at that. Um, but in the interim, you know, that's a like down the road
Yeah.
2.0, 3.0, you
Right.
know,
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
In the interim, when children are not learning these basics, we need an escape. We need to allow them quickly to get out, because the life of a child, you know, there's certain things that happen each year of their life developmentally. And if they miss those windows, you know, we saw this during COVID. They don't catch up, or they're not able to grasp something when they've missed years of the time that they would develop, whether it's, speaking or learning sounds, different things. And so we've got to get them out quickly. And the opportunity to do that is to empower parents with a portion of that funding to select an alternative. Because what we saw as our NAEP scores, it's the National Assessment of Education Progress Exam scores, it's known as the nation's report card. Those came out in January this year. 7 out of 10 children in public schools in our country are not learning to read on grade level or do math on grade level. 7 out of 10. That's a death sentence to their future. Parents have to hope that their child's going to be 3 out of 10 children at school that's learning. That is absolutely unacceptable. And parents have to have a way out.
That is so crazy. And those standards to begin with are not that high.
That
They're
is
low,
true.
in fact.
It continued to be dumbed down over the years, especially through COVID. This idea that, well, we know we weren't teaching kids, so we can't really test kids. That's going to look bad on us. And so we've seen like grade inflation, standardized tests be removed. And again, kids aren't learning and these tests have been dumbed down. So even with that data, as shocking as it is, if the standard was where it should be, those numbers would be even higher of kids that are just not learning the basics.
Yeah, it makes me wonder who wants the populace of the US to be uneducated and therefore easier to control. I mean, this has got to be intentional on some level.
But definitely, I would agree because, we can look back even in the congressional record, dating back decades, where it was said on record if the teacher unions control education and fail to provide, high quality education, that we're going to be able to have greater government control in our country and we'll be able to indoctrinate kids. That's like a quote.
Oh my gosh.
That was in there in the record. I mean, it was a strategic effort to say, an uneducated electorate is going to allow for greater government control, and it is so corrupt. That is not the principle that our country was founded on. And we've got to get back to freedom, especially when it comes to education.
How are we going to destroy the teachers' unions?
I don't know if destroy is the right word for that, but to take some of that power and control, the fastest way to do that, as well as to improve public schools, is to allow families to exit because money talks and the principles of free market. So when parents can exit and have an alternative, that's going to put pressure, market forces, a competition on those public schools to improve and get out these non academic priorities that are taking up astronomical amounts of time during the school day at the expense of the learning the kids need to learn. And so, you can't just beat down the teacher unions doors and tell them, here's what you've got to do. Some states, you can't pass all this legislation, but you've got to allow families to exit and let the free markets take away their power as people leave and there's true competition in K-12 education.
Well, I'm glad that someone's doing this. What else do you want to share with us, Dr. Keri?
I would just say there's so much to be hopeful about in our country. So, as I said, we've gone from 0 states having universal school choice over the last 4 years to 16 as of today, more on the way this year, this legislative session, as well as in coming years. And as we continue just state by state to do this work, our country is going to benefit from individual children, their families, their communities, our larger society, our American culture, and the competitiveness of our country on a world stage. All of the byproducts are beneficial to us improving education, and the status quo is not working. We've got to try something else. And really grateful for the leadership of these governors who are doing the work to advance school choice in their states, as well as coming from the White House to say, we cannot continue course. This is absolutely detrimental to these individual children, future of our country as well. And so getting rid of things like the U.S. Department of Education, and bringing in innovation to education. There's recently an executive order talking about AI. That's got to be a part of our kids' education. They need to know what it is, but why not leverage this technology that can individually help students learn, whether it's one-on-one tutoring, or differentiating instruction to where that learner is. We can't continue this factory model system where kids sit in rows and they do worksheets, whether those worksheets are on a computer or a printout. It's still just low level learning. And it's assuming that all kids come in with the same interests, abilities, background knowledge, skills, knowledge. It's just not true. Like, they're all unique. And so leveraging things like artificial intelligence, making education more customized, bringing in innovation. We've got to do that because we're preparing them not for today's world, but for the world of tomorrow that they're going to enter. And it's only becoming, more and more technology advanced.
I think I misunderstood the statistic the first time you said it. So you said in the last 4 years, went from 0 states having full school choice to 16.
Yes. And that's
Wow,
translated
that's amazing.
between all those, those 16 states that have full school choice for all families being eligible, plus states that have partial school choice programs. Those have grown tremendously since COVID as well. The state maybe wasn't able to pass the full universal, but they were able to increase a program or start a new program. And so you take those numbers, and we were in 2022, less than 1% of kids in our country that had access to school choice unless their parents had the feasibility to homeschool or thousands of dollars a year for tuition. And now we're at over 50% of kids. But again, like, we're not stopping till every single family in our country has that freedom.
That's really encouraging. And thank you for your role in this. I really do feel strongly about it. And it makes life so much easier for these parents and gives these kids a greater opportunity. So thank you, Keri.
It's such a joy to do this work, and colleagues around the country that are doing this work. It's an army of us, and we're continuing to grow that army and see such success, which is bringing more success. Because when one state passes universal school choice and it borders a state that doesn't have school choice, for example, Idaho passed universal school choice this year. Well, Washington and Oregon border Idaho, and they have zero school choice for families outside of that public system. And so it's very attractive to families. We saw during COVID, people move to pro-freedom states, especially when it comes to the education of our children. So we're gonna see families relocate. This comes at the perfect time where more and more workers have job flexibility. They don't necessarily have to go into a physical office, so they can relocate. Um, and so as families move, that's gonna put pressure then on those states that have been so hostile to school choice. As they see their workforce leave, they see companies leave because of the regulation and because of lack of school choice. And so in due time, I truly believe we're gonna have universal school choice in all states in our country. It's gonna take a while, especially for those 2 states I did mention on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California. Those might be the last 3 states, but we're gonna continue course. And as this grows, it's gonna put pressure on those purple states and those blue states, in due time, to get the job done and empower parents.
Let's keep fighting.
Absolutely.
Awesome.